Welcome back. Thanks for being with us again. Today, something a little different. We're going to talk about baseball, something we both have loved for a long time.
Still do.
We're going to talk about compound interest and the role that Bernie Madoff played in creating what we call Bobby Bonilla Day, which is actually today, the day that we're recording this. Happy July 1st. We're halfway through the year.
It's been a great year.
It has been an interesting year, to say the least. Market's off to the roughest start since 1970.
More than 5 decades.
Never a stat.
But hey, you've made it to this point.
Right.
If you've stuck with it, you've made it to this point. And frankly, good on you, because that's the hardest thing to do. But what we know is the best path forward.
Yeah. And if you've come this far, hopefully you're willing to go a little further. It's a quote from The Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies. But we're not talking about that today. Maybe we'll find some financial tie-in from The Shawshank Redemption at some point. But today, it's Bobby Bonilla Day. And we're going to talk about what I find to be one of the most fascinating stories from baseball and something that comes up every July 1st. We'll start with some background. Back in the year 2000, the New York Mets decided to cut a player they had signed. They signed Bobby Bonilla, who was a
really good
player in the 90s. Played for the Pittsburgh Pirates for a long time. Very good switch hitter, 6-time All-Star. He won a World Series, was a very good player. And they'd signed him to this contract, and he'd been injured, and due to his age and injuries and the like, they just decided to part ways. In baseball, guaranteed contracts, which means whatever your contract states, you are entitled to.
Which is different from a lot of other sports.
The NFL, the only thing that's guaranteed is really a signing bonus. And everything else, it could be a 20-year contract that's year to year, and the team can cut you. They don't have to pay you past what they would have paid you for the previous season and any signing bonus. So Major League Baseball, the players have a little better deal. Your contract's guaranteed. So
especially if you're Bobby Bonilla.
Right, yeah. Yep. And so the Mets had to pay him some money.
Yeah, they had to get him out of his contract.
Right.
Can't, because he's guaranteed. You can't just cut him and say, all right, we're done with you, and we're not going to pay you anymore. But they didn't want him on the roster anymore because they probably felt there were other players that they wanted to be able to bring in. And so in cutting him, they had to get creative because they owed him almost $6 million, $5.9 million.
Call it $6 million.
Yep. And instead of just giving him the check for almost $6 million, they decided to give him a stream of payments that would start in 2011. So they came up with this idea where they didn't have to pay him for 11 years, but beginning in 2011, they would pay him on July 1st annually $1.2 million for 25 years, which takes that contract from 2011 to 2035, where Bobby Bonilla will be 72 years old.
So he's 72 years old, last played for the team in the year 2000.
And last played in the major leagues in 2001 for maybe the Cardinals?
Yeah, I can't remember.
But I know he retired shortly thereafter.
And so every year, he hasn't played in over 20 years and still gets a payment today. He still gets a check. I was reading an interview. He still gets a check.
That's funny.
For $1.2 million.
I think they should have him throw out the first pitch on July 1st. Again, assuming they're the home team, and just hand him the check as he's completing the first pitch.
Yeah. And so there's a lot in the sports world that is made on today. You will see articles. It's Bobby Bonilla Day, the day that, Bobby Bonilla made one of the smartest deals in sports history.
And the Mets, under their new ownership, kind of celebrated a little bit more. I think the previous ownership, as we'll talk a little bit more about this, probably was a real thorn in their side.
So why make a deal, and why are we talking about this? Not necessarily because we love baseball, but there's a real deep tie-in to investing and the power of compound interest.
Yep.
So there's a couple of things that went into this. At the time, $6 million was a large chunk of change to have to pay out in one payment.
And this also is not new. No. Manny Ramirez is still being paid by the Red Sox, and I think he is through 2026. Ken Griffey Jr. is still being paid by the Reds through 2024. So it's not anything new. It's just the fact of, I think, that Bobby Bonilla's age and the fact that he still has, even after today, will have 13 more payments to go.
And so how this deal was structured, and how they got to, because you can, if you do the math real quick and say, well, they owed him $6 million, but he's getting 25 payments of $1.2 million,
Right.
which equals $35 million.
Yep.
So there's a big difference there.
Some key differences, yeah.
The reason is that when this contract was negotiated, there was an 8% interest rate that was calculated into these payments. You could think of this like a mortgage or an auto loan the Mets were taking out to pay Bobby Bonilla's contract. And so what was built into that, they essentially said, okay, $6 million today. If we start making this payment in 2011,
11 years from when they negotiated the contract,
for 25 years after the first payment starts, an 8% interest rate works out to $35 million. So it's made into equal payments.
Yep.
So again, though, we have to ask the question, why make such a deal?
Well, they felt they'd be able to make more money. And they, in the eyes of the Mets, we ran a calculation that if they had invested that $6 million just into the S&P 500.
I'm going to stop you real quick, just so we'll explain it very briefly before we get into the numbers. The basic thought was, if the cost of buying out Bobby Bonilla was 8%, they could keep the $6 million today and invest it over the lifetime of that contract and earn a better return.
Yeah, and make more money. So that not only can they pay him and still have money left over after the fact.
Now let's go to the numbers.
So if they had taken that $6 million and just invested it into the S&P 500, one of the most broadly accepted indices in the financial world, average annual rate of return close to $10.5 million.
10.5%.
Excuse me, thank you.
Yep.
10.5%. Over a 35-year span. Because remember, yes, they're paying Bobby Bonilla for actually 36 years. They're paying him for 25 payments, but those weren't starting until 11 years after the contract was negotiated. And that's a really important part of the deal.
Right.
Because that adds more than a decade to the time value of money calculation that you have to do. That's $6 million invested just in the S&P 500 36 years later would have been worth around $80 million. So if the Mets had just had that money invested in the S&P 500, not only would they have paid Bobby Bonilla his $35 million, but they also would have had another, you're looking at $45 million left.
They would have,
when all was said and done, that they would have made
a significant profit on that deal.
But they didn't put it in the S&P 500.
No, they didn't.
They put it in something better.
And this is where
the time.
This is where Bernie Madoff comes into the story, which just plot twist.
Yeah, big plot twist. Yeah.
Is that the Mets owners, the Wilpons, were
the former
owners were very good friends and large clients of Bernard Madoff.
Yep.
Who at the time was leading his investors to believe that they were averaging returns in the high double digits.
Yep.
And that they could expect that to continue.
Yep.
And so the Mets ownership at the time thought, well, we're getting these great returns with Bernie Madoff. Let's invest the money now. It'll be worth exponentially more in the future, and we'll pay Bobby Bonilla off. The problem was they weren't making that money because Bernie Madoff was a crook and was scamming people.
Scamming everybody. Didn't work. Except for Bobby Bonilla.
It did. Now, it did work for Bobby Bonilla. It
still
worked
works
very
for him,
well. And when you think, and you know what? His agent is someone who deserves a lot of the credit. I don't know who the agent was, but whoever helped structure this deal, because essentially Bobby Bonilla has a pension.
He also has another one. I think with a combination of maybe the Pirates and the Mets. It's a much smaller one.
Right.
He has a second one
small
as
little
well.
check he
there's
gets.
another small one. Yep.
And so
I think it's like $250,000.
Hey,
I mean, it's not.
It's not jump change.
That'll get you a tank of gas.
Still a nice. Get you one tank of gas. So it worked out very well for Bobby Bonilla, and in a way, it worked out. You can make the case for the Mets because they saved that $6 million at the time and were able to sign other players.
And they made it to the World Series.
They did make the World Series in 2000.
Yeah. Yep.
They made it to the World Series. They didn't win the World Series, but they were able to sign a couple of other players for a total of around $6 million. Yep. They did make it to the World Series at the time. And so I just love this story because, one, it's fascinating, but two, it is such a good example of a couple of things. One is the power of compound interest. And we have this conversation with clients and have had it many, many times where it's, they might be looking at buying a car. Well, it's different now than maybe it was 6 or 7 months ago. But if you're going to buy a car and you can take a loan for 2% at the time, which a lot of folks could, and even now an auto loan maybe is higher, but you may still be able to get an auto loan for 4 or 4.5%. If we can, instead of buying the car outright, take that cash and over a period of time earn 8 or 9%, it may be worth considering.
Well, your money's working double as efficiently for you.
You allow your cash to work for you.
As long as it's not in a scam.
As long as you are not investing it in a Ponzi scheme or something.
That's where simple is better. You don't have to recreate the wheel when it comes to investing. There's always a new idea, a new concept that on its surface will make you a millionaire overnight. Simple is better. Don't try to get too creative, because when you get too creative, it often backfires on you. Just keep it simple. Over time, it'll work out just fine. Keep it simple. Keep it boring.
And if the Mets had done this, this would be a different story.
Yep.
Because we would laugh because Bobby Bonilla would still get his check for $1.2 million, but the Mets
and they'd still be laughing too.
Would be laughing because of the fact that they would have netted a profit of $45 million potentially on that contract.
Yeah.
Simple is definitely better. The other lesson that I think is important is that sometimes we do have to think outside the box. It doesn't mean look for more complex investment strategies, but it means that sometimes if we are willing to be creative with how we solve a problem or take a moment and say, okay, well, is there another way we could structure this? Maybe I take less now in exchange for a much better result. And in that case, Bobby Bonilla could, now you could say, well, Bonilla could have taken the $6 million and he could have invested the money too.
Could have. It's kind of like saving in your 401k, right?
He could have.
I'm going to take less now for a better result in 15, 20, 30 years.
He took the answer that I would argue had significantly less risk.
Yeah, sure.
In that he had a guaranteed payout stream with a guaranteed 8% return.
Yep.
That's tough to beat.
Well, especially now. At that time, it was, 8%. I mean, interest rates were a little different then. But where investment returns were a little different than where they are today, but it has worked out very well for him, and it will continue to.
And what has changed is that the previous Mets owners, because the Wilpons had to sell the Mets because of the losses they sustained and with Bernie Madoff, the new Mets owners have taken a bit more of a upbeat or lighter look at this.
They kind of celebrated a little bit more.
But I think it's just a fascinating story. Compound interest is And so think of this too. If you are someone who is just starting to invest, you don't need to start with a lot as long as you can start early. 35, 36 years for the Mets could be the difference between $6 million, $80 million. That could be the difference between $6,000 and $80,000 over a period of time. Compound interest, time, simple is better.
Keep it simple.
And Bobby Bonilla Day will continue.
That's right.
For another
more years.
13 years. So this was a good one. I was glad that I remembered that, hey, July 1st is coming up. It's Bobby Bonilla Day. Good story. Good story. Bobby Bonilla, a sports business Hall of Fame first ballot inductee in my world.
Yeah, him and his agent, for sure.
That's for sure. Okay. Hey, this is Wade and Noel. Thanks for being with us. Wishing you a happy Independence Day, which will have passed by the time this podcast comes out. But nonetheless, happy birthday to the United States of America. And here's hoping the second half of 2022 is a more profitable year than the first half has been.
I'll double that table tap.
All right. Okay. We'll be back next week. Thanks for being with us.